Everybody for coming. I know there's still people milling in. I've gotten lost enough times in this hotel to know that it's not easy to get from room to room, but thanks everybody for coming. My name is Shad Morona, and this is day 2 of the conference where I'm president of the American Society of Criminology. So these panels are near and dear to my heart and the hearts of my 2 program chairs, Jill McCorkle and Jamie Fader. The 3 of us thought long and hard about how we wanted to shape the vibe and the message that you get from this conference. Obviously, it's the usual ASC chaos of 50 different panels and running from one talk to another and so forth. But the presidential panels are really our opportunity to try to create a theme for the conference. And this year's theme was around seeking justice, reconciling with our past, and reimagining a new future for criminology. And so when we were approached by Ashley Nellis and the Sentencing Project, the idea of this being the 50th anniversary of mass incarceration in the United States, it's not one of those birthdays that many of us are celebrating, but it's a hugely important one to think about and recognize, and especially when you think about the ASC. We're at our 78th annual meeting of the American Society of Criminology, and what role criminology has played in those 50 years of the buildup of mass incarceration, and more urgently, more importantly, what role we can think about playing in terms of reversing that mass incarceration and getting some mass decarceration in the United States and internationally. So this was really a perfect panel. Yesterday we started off with an incredible panel on revisiting the work of W.E.B. Du Bois in criminology and reimagining a criminology more inspired and properly recognizing of Du Bois' legacy and his message in criminology and for criminology. And then tomorrow in our final presidential panel, we're going to be looking at police violence in urban America today. So not an uncontroversial subject to end things with, but couldn't be a more important one in 2023, we thought. So I'm going to just hand over now to what is truly an incredible panel, and I will let Ashley introduce them to you, but would join me in thanking all of the panel for what's going to be a fantastic afternoon.
Good afternoon. I really want to thank Shad and Jamie first for taking this topic seriously. When I first raised it, my name is Ashley Nellis. I'm co-director of research at the Sentencing Project, and the Sentencing Project has had a steady presence at ASC for many years. We feel strongly in combining advocacy and research. And this year marks 50 years. Roughly 50 years ago, the United States embarked on a path of mass incarceration that has led to a staggering increase in the prison population. In 1972, the imprisonment rate was only 93 per 100,000 people. The prison expansion that commenced starting in 1973 and reached its peak in 2009 achieved a 7-fold increase over the intervening years. And today, almost 2 million people, disproportionately Black Americans, are incarcerated in our nation's prisons and jails. So the Sentencing Project and a coalition of advocates and experts and partners and academics launched a public education campaign called 50 Years and a Wake Up, ending the mass incarceration crisis in America. And our campaign has raised awareness to the public, the policymakers, and to the academic community about the dire state of the criminal legal system in the country and the devastating impact it has had on families, on communities, on children, and perhaps more effective crime prevention strategies for our country are in our coming years. The title for our campaign was born out of a colloquial phrase that incarcerated people sometimes use to describe the life of their sentence, plus 1 day. So they may say something like, I have 20 years and a wake-up. We also use it to serve as a double entendre, calling for our country to wake up to the harsh and dangerous realities of mass incarceration in America. Finally, this year also marks 50 years since Jerome Miller famously shut down the entire juvenile justice system in Massachusetts, having been fed up with trying to reform it. Miller is a reformer broadly seen as a guiding light in today's youth justice reforms. So I'm so excited to spend the next hour and 20 minutes with these on-the-ground experts, some of whom can bring their own lived experience to this conversation, which is so badly needed to change the course of the system and our research around the system. So the speakers today are Keisha Middlemass, LaTanya Myers, Michael Schlossman, Claire Shubik-Richards, and Andre Sims. I want to tell you just a bit about them, and then we're going to launch right in. So Keisha Middlemass is an associate professor of political science at Howard University. Dr. Middlemass teaches graduate and undergraduate courses in public policy and focuses specifically on questions about the politics of punishment, racial justice, and the lived experience of formerly incarcerated people. Her award-winning book, Convicted and Condemned, The Politics and Policies of Prisoner Reentry, is an interdisciplinary and multi-layered examination of prisoner reentry. LaTanya Myers is an advocate and an activist. She was hired as Philadelphia's first ever bail navigator for the Philadelphia Defenders Association while still under court supervision, and was featured in the PBS documentary Philly DA. After her work with the Philadelphia Bail Fund, she founded her own organization called Above All Odds, and she helps returning citizens address the root causes of incarceration, such as housing and financial literacy. In 2021, she was recognized as a Reebok Human Rights Award recipient. Michael Schlossman is a sociologist and lead research analyst at the Institute for Innovation and Implementation at the University of Maryland in Baltimore. He has worked as a research consultant in the Allegheny County Juvenile Court and as a research analyst for the Juvenile Court Judges Commission in Harrisburg, where he analyzed patterns and trends in Pennsylvania's juvenile justice system. His research, which is based on oral history, interviews, and archival work into activism's role in acceleration of decarceration reform in Pennsylvania's juvenile justice system in the 1970s, is part of his larger effort to explain continuity and change in America's youth justice and the impact of the decarceration movement on the treatment of system-involved young people. Claire Shubik-Richards is the executive director of the Pennsylvania Prison Society, which has been around for more than 230 years. But Claire has not been around for more than 230 years. She has only been around for 20 years in this space, and the Prison Society provides assistance to incarcerated people and their families, works to ensure vital support networks, and that those support networks are kept alive while someone is incarcerated, and provides a window into the closed world of prisons. Andre Sims is a poet, and this is our final person. Andre Sims is a poet, a rapper, and an activist in Philadelphia, and the founder of Day One, Not Day Two, a nonprofit organization that uses creative expression for healing and community empowerment. He is an advocate for reforming adult transfer policies in Pennsylvania, for improving the conditions of confinement, and for preventing the building of new juvenile facilities in the Commonwealth. He runs a participatory defense hub and co-teaches a solutions journalism course at Temple. So I'm very excited. I'm going to launch right in with our first question, which goes to all of you guys, in whatever order you feel guided. What are the harms of the mass incarceration system that you believe are under-acknowledged, underestimated, or poorly understood? The race to the mic.
Yeah, I could start us off. One of the harms that I feel like are completely underestimated and unacknowledged are the financial impact of incarceration on the families of those who are incarcerated. We talk a lot about, the impact on the individuals or the impact on the overwhelming community, but we're not doing that time alone. I spent 8 years in prison at the age of 17, and my mom was with me every step of the way. My sister was with me. They were the ones paying the lawyer fees. They were the ones putting money on the books, And when we're talking about communities that are already, below the poverty line, when we're talking about communities that are already struggling, it's not just me who's impacted in that moment. I had to look and see like this system not only sucked the life out of me and the people who were in this prison with me, but also the families that were driving 2, 3, 4 hours to come to those visits. And it's all business, it's all economy. So your phone calls cost money. The food that you eat, the commissary costs money. The video visits cost money, and that is just draining our communities. And so that's something that I feel like is not talked about enough when we're talking about the harms of, this criminal justice system.
I can definitely agree as to what Andre said. In addition to the financial burden that's on our families that's already in low-income situations, I think it's a public health issue. The mental health crisis and the lack of services that are being provided, not only for those that's in the inside, but also our families that's going through depression and the ripple effects and the collateral consequences of their loved ones being arrested. So I think we should look at this as also a public health crisis as well.
Okay. So I want to start out by talking about something that's under-acknowledged that isn't a harm, and then I'll get into something that is under-acknowledged that is a harm. So with some context, just to provide some context, at the national level, juvenile incarceration rates declined 70% between 1995 and 2019. And between 1997 and 2017, the number of youth held in large correctional facilities, over 200 people, declined 87%. This occurred during a time of declining youth crime, and that's a big part of the explanation, of course, but there has also been a lot of movement beyond that. And I think that despite all this progress, though, we still see that mass incarceration exists, especially in certain locales. It's not as widespread maybe as it used to be, but it's not uncommon. And you could see that in Pennsylvania, where we've had numerous scandals that have showed how large correctional institutions or even reform schools that have to supposedly have a nice campus end up leading to abusive treatment of youth, and they are not the solution. Yet they're all too commonly used. In Pennsylvania, for example, a 2021 report by the bipartisan PA Juvenile Justice Task Force showed that nearly 40% of youth who are incarcerated were first-time offenders, right? And so this pattern continues in spite of some progress, and it's really unfortunate, and the effects are harmful.
Good afternoon, everyone. So as a political scientist, I think about systems and all the systems that are connected across society. And I also think about power a lot and the power of those systems to actually oppress people. And so I think about the criminal legal system as a system of oppression without even thinking about the people that implement the policies. Just the systems, the policies, the procedures can be harmful. And then when we think about re-entry is largely an individual experience. Yes, if you've got family support, you will have that support, but largely it is an individual that has to navigate multiple systems simultaneously and do it successfully and not trip up, or they then fail at re-entry. So this whole idea of parallel systems and having to consistently and concurrently navigate them, it means that individuals that are re-entering have to do so many things that they might actually not be ready to do after serving 10 or 20 years. So like basics, think Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It's basics. Weather appropriate clothes. When you're released in Philadelphia in January, what kind of attire do you have? Do you have cash to set up a bank account? Because these days you can't just go through the world without access to a debit card. And then you need an email address and a cell phone and just to then navigate the systems. And so I encourage everybody to think about the systems. They're always connected to other experiences of reentry. And my research, time and time again, it's almost as if there are two stories about reentry. If individuals have a family with disposable income, which Andre just talked about, they tend to be successful because that disposable income can then buy those basic needs. The other success stories are sheer luck. You run into a mentor. You run into somebody who actually believes in your ability to do well. And that should not be how we focus on reentry. We need a system of reentry to then help people reenter.
I think one thing that's not, it's hard for me to answer this question because I live with the consequences of mass incarceration in my work every day. So I have to try and put myself in the mind of someone who doesn't think about it all the time. So I think one thing that is, when I think about some of the policymakers that I interface with here in Pennsylvania, I think one of the things that's not known or not acknowledged is just how the prisons, and the jails, but particularly the prisons, they don't work. And they don't work in a way that it doesn't even work for administrators. So, for example, basic information, basic data on assaults, on drug interceptions. The systems don't collect it reliably. Basic things that you think policymakers assume our jails and prisons know. How violent is it? How much contraband is there? Who's where? Even is Joe Schmo in housing unit A or is Joe Schmo in housing unit B? They don't know. And they can't know because they're asked to do the impossible. They're in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, our 85 county and state facilities are asked to house 61,000 people against their will and care for every aspect of their lives for people who've been deprived of their liberty. You can't do it on that scale. And so as a result, we have systems that just don't function. I mean, how many times have I gone to talk to somebody in housing unit A and no one can find them because they don't know where they are? I always say that we invest more in Amazon tracking a package from point A to point B than we do where someone is in a correctional facility or if they've died. I mean, one of the things, something that's unacknowledged here, right, in Pennsylvania, we've just had some great reporting on it, is we don't know how many people die in our correctional facilities in the United States. What counties have been reporting to both the state and the federal government, the last estimate, Josh Vaughn isn't in the audience, but anybody can go look up Josh Vaughn's excellent reporting. We were something like 25% off on just the number of people that had died. So I think that's underacknowledged.
The next, and let me say that once we get through this round of questions, open it up and have about 20 minutes or so for everybody else to have a microphone. Start thinking of your questions now. The next question is, is that what you're doing? Okay. Sorry, I know I changed from there. I'm sure that the tech people are really mad. What is the most important existing or historical reform that you've seen to reduce the footprint or the harm of mass incarceration?
Well, I'll just say, here in Pennsylvania, the two biggest things in my tenure at the Prison Society, which is only 7 years long, that have led to a reduction in the number of people in custody, and there have been two of them. One is COVID, and counties really working together to recognize the harm that would be caused to people in prison at that moment, and then putting, court schedules be damned. Let's speed up the process and really make sure only the people that we really feel are a threat to community safety are in there, right? And so our counties decarcerated as a result of that. Now, COVID ends, my docket is just as complicated and my scheduling processes go back and incarceration is increasing again. So one was COVID, the other is Larry Krasner. So if you look at the total number of people in custody in the Commonwealth since 2017, there's been about a 12% decline, and most all of that has come from Philadelphia County. So it's decisions being made in Larry Krasner's office.
What I can say from my personal experience is the willingness to work with those that's impacted, the willingness to involve them in the issues that's actually, that they survive from, employing them, allowing them to not only just tell their story, but be a part of finding a solution is life-changing. It helps fight recidivism, seeing former juvenile lifers come home, becoming agents of change. Now we are dispelling those negative stigmas that was once attached to us, and also giving hope to others to open and walk in spaces that they thought was not, that they didn't have a seat at the table for. So I think that's something that has been transformative, and I look forward to continuing doing and supporting.
Yeah, I would just piggyback on that. I was going to say, seeing the juvenile lifers return home, it was extremely impactful for me. Going into Graterford at 18 years old, I remember going on a cell block and realizing that this was the most older black men I ever seen in one point in time and space. This is where everybody was at. They weren't in my communities growing up. They weren't in the schools. They weren't in the jobs and the stores I were going in. They were all in this prison. And Graterford, historically, they had a large number of the juvenile lifers. And to see, some of my mentors, come out and come home and, become agents of change and start their own organizations and start working on mentoring. Like, the work they're doing is actually like preventing crime and is more effective than, so many reforms that, we're arguing about right now. And we just need to continue to be led by those closest to the quote unquote problem, because we have the solution. So yeah, I just will double down on what you said.
Okay. So I'm going to talk about a historical reform. Talked a little bit, actually talked about the 1970s as the initiation of today's system of mass incarceration. It was also the time when juvenile justice decarceration movement first emerged as a potent political force, at least in some states. The strategy that I think has been effective, that I'm going to focus on, is provoking and taking advantage of crises. And I think that is exactly what Jerome Miller, who Ashley mentioned earlier, did when he came to Pennsylvania a few years after he was in Massachusetts and closed down their their reform schools. He was appointed by Milton Schaap as basically as a special assistant for juvenile justice in 1975, specifically to shake up the status quo. It was like that was the goal. And he basically came in and repeatedly attacked juvenile court judges in the press for sending committed kids to Camp Hill Prison, SCI Camp Hill, basically an adult prison. There were more than 400 youth who were in an adult prison in the mid-1970s, right in Harrisburg, for minor offenses, which, and it was a horrible, horrible facility. Miller called it a human sewer. And basically, after a youth who was there for a status offense, didn't even commit a delinquency offense, committed suicide, he took it, really took it to the press, accelerated his attack, went behind the back of the governor's office and invited in 60 Minutes to document the conditions of the prison. Created an episode called Nobody Coddled Bobby. But ultimately, those kinds of tactics created the pressure that ultimately led to that institution being closed. So the Attorney General was generally not a forward-thinking leader on this issue, but he was essentially pressured into closing the facility because of all of what was going on. And so I would just like to say that taking advantage of crises and pushing for change using crises, I think that has been effective in juvenile justice reform, not just in the 70s, but up until today.
I am a member of a national stakeholders roundtable, and we are looking at reform efforts. And so the entire system, of course, needs to be blown up, done away with. Until that happens, we are literally looking at reforming the lived spaces. That prisons aren't going to go anywhere, they're political calculation, but we're looking at lived spaces and what do the spaces inside look like? What does the visitor's room look like? Where are we choosing different colors, different textures for the furniture? Why do prisoners have to sleep on very thin bed mattresses? And so there are 3 really good examples right now that are in existence, and we're using them as models. So Las Colinas in California, San Diego County, Las Colinas Detention and Reentry Facilities for women, and they have literally rethought their whole space process from intake, from processing women, and they're treating it more like, and although the analogy is not good, but they're treating it like going to the doctor's office. You know, you get called back, you go to the nurse, you give blood, and then you go someone else and someone takes your blood pressure and your weight, and then you go back to the waiting room, and then you get called back and you go see someone else. But they're treating it as a space that if it's going to take hours to intake somebody, they don't need to be in a holding cell. So on entry, they're being treated differently. And these changes, of course, have to come with institutional and training changes, but changing the space can be transformative. In North Dakota, in Bismarck, there are 2 modular housing units at a minimum security prison for men, and it's more like a residential dorm. So this whole idea of changing the furniture, changing the space, changing the colors. And then in Pennsylvania, there's Little Scandinavia. And this whole idea, and everybody from here, there was like, I know you've got Little Scandinavia on your list. There is those changes in the prison facilities that are more humane, more caring, that until we decarcerate, the idea of warmer colors and softer furniture and kitchen areas where people can actually prepare meals, you're humanizing the individual instead of just treating them as a subject. And so COVID, of course, interrupted things, but we also know that the contraband did not change. So who's bringing the stuff in? Who's bringing the drugs in? Like, that still is not acknowledged as much as it should be. If the COs are bringing in the contraband, why then do visitors and visiting facilities in a prison have to be so harmful to interactions? Why can't we have a play area for children where their loved one can actually get in the sand or go on a slide or push their child on a swing? Why do we have to have literally the institutionalized furniture and the drab colors where everything is just shades of gray? And I know real estate agents don't understand the connection of their shades of gray to prisons, but if you are into real estate and watching all the shades of gray, I'm like, do they know they're replicating inside a prison? But anyways, why do we have to do that? We don't. So literally, we're trying to get one step at a time. The stakeholders roundtable is trying to convince state legislatures to put towards $10,000 in paint and furniture for like 2 facilities in a state. I'm not naming the states because, you know, if it gets out there and then politics, and then it'll be squashed because somebody will be like, oh, we're now soft on crime, because remember, I study politics. But this whole idea of changing the facilities is transformative because now we're treating people as humans, as whole people, instead of treating them as a subject to be processed like we're at the widget factory.
Next question is, what has been the role, positive, negative, of the field of criminology and criminal justice in the story of mass incarceration?
In our convening call, people were like, okay, scholars, this is your home run. Would you like to finish or start this conversation, Claire? I have 3 things. And the lovely thing about being a political scientist, I can say these things because none of you will be my external reviewers to go for full professor. How do we define recidivism? Exactly. It is one of the most fundamental concepts of re-entry in criminology. And there are so many different definitions based on the jurisdiction, based on the crime, based on the person collecting the data. Back to Claire's point about collecting data. It's based on vibes. So this whole idea, is it just rearrest? Or is it a parole violation? Or is it a conviction or reconviction, depending on, you know, how prosecutors will hold back crimes and then recharge you for some stuff because you didn't adhere to some other rules you didn't even know about? Is it a conviction of a new crime? Is it reincarceration? So this is a major problem. I don't have a fix. But the definition is so inconsistent, it is losing its meaning as scholars. So if you talk about recidivism, I encourage scholars to define what you mean in your research. If you're doing white papers, define what you mean by it, because the term has lost so much meaning in the larger conversation. We actually can't now compare studies across time. We can't compare studies in the same state. We can't compare across states, which is a problem when we're talking about policy reform. Second, re-entry success and failure is a dichotomous variable. Boo. 1 for success and 0 for failure. This is such a crude measure. If someone is homeless, hungry, unemployed, but has not been rearrested, is not back in the system, is actually successful in your large N model. Go out and talk to people. There are so many people living between 1 and 0, but our large N studies are not capturing that lived experience. Third, reentry cannot actually be captured using whatever sophisticated models that you use. First of all, half of us read your journal articles and we don't understand the methods. And I'm trained in methods. The systems and the individuals have to be cataloged as being together. The person is not separate from the systems, and the systems are not separate from the reentry experience. And so, are people failing at reentry because of poverty? How is your study, how is your measure going to capture that? So what works, we know, is holistic wraparound services. We know that works, and so I just encourage people to study individuals, systems, and think about how we're defining things and be clear in what you mean when you're doing your work.
I think one thing, and especially coming to this conference and going back to the importance of including formerly incarcerated people in decisions and the work and the research. And coming to this conference, I never knew of the Division for Convict Criminology. And I met a group of amazing formerly incarcerated individuals that are authoring articles, that are researchers, that are participating and not just studying people, but actually has the personal and lived experience to then articulate and come up with solutions and offer suggestions for critical policy reviews. So I think that merging these two communities together and supporting those that's been closest to the situation so that we can help each other, help us, help our communities. And I'm just so thankful for this criminology conference for allowing that division to be here, be heard, because I'm looking forward to learning the systems that are oppressing my communities so that our communities can come back and change the systems and offer better solutions into addressing these problems.
So, I mean, in terms of juvenile justice, I think we're still living with the after effects of the so-called super predator theory put forth by a political scientist named John DiIulio. Sorry.
It's okay. It wasn't me.
No. who contributed to a moral panic. Basically, there was in the context of a rise in youth violence in the late 80s and early 1990s, he basically contributed to this idea that there were these youth who were just completely, there was nothing you could do. The only thing to do would be to lock them away, throw away the key, and that it was based on pseudoscience, it was based on trends in crime that he predicted that didn't come true because they were based on total hogwash in terms of the theories. I mean, really wouldn't have taken that much at the time to figure that out, actually. But it's criminology. I really think that did have a major effect on public policies. We have a large number of, still have in Pennsylvania, a large number of juvenile lifers. It's gone down. We still have youth who are punished as adults, and the number's gone down, but it's still, that idea is with us that certain people are irredeemable. That goes against our knowledge that desistance is possible, that and that there are treatment programs in the community that do work. And I would say that criminology, to some extent, has redeemed itself, I would say, over the past 25 years, because some of that evidence showing that community-based programs, when they're implemented with fidelity, can work, that's played into some of the decarceration reforms in places like New York. And so I think that has helped to create a consensus around the idea that community-based care is better and better to do.
So for me, as somebody who has lots of criminologist friends but is not a criminologist, it's the problem of the elephant, the blind person and the elephant, right? So I know the little bits of the elephant that I've interfaced with, but I don't know the full elephant, right? So my perspective on criminology is limited to the assortment of experiences that I've had. One of the things that has been missing from really all of the research that I've had the privilege and the time to read, and the conversations with criminologists that I've had in this country, has been what I really think is the bedrock discussion of ethics. I work in prisons, so fundamentally it's about depriving people of their liberty. That's a big ethical question. When does government have the right to do it? In what circumstances does government have the right to do that? When Alison Liebling says that correctional officers are the best moral philosophers, the inadvertent moral philosophers, I think that's really true. The people that have to spend their days as captors do think about whether they externalize it or not. They do think about the ethics of what they're doing, and that, to me, has been largely absent from the conversations and research, much of which I have found extremely helpful, that I've had the privilege to read and engage with.
And I know I'm not supposed to also speak, but I can't help myself with this one tiny thing, which is I think that the field of criminology would really benefit, from abandoning use that is not human based, so abandoning words like inmate, offender, convict, felon, even prisoner. And even though it may feel awkward at first, and I was one of these that felt like, well, one of my original arguments on this was, well, doctors refer to them, to people who come to them as patients, and so what's wrong with it? But when I was sort of highly encouraged to drop all of those words from my writing, it really gave me a deeper connection to the people I'm actually studying. And with that deeper connection comes empathy and more of an urgency, which is really badly needed. I'm going to get off my soapbox. I'm not going to say anything more, I hope. What is the most important priority currently for addressing the size and impact of mass incarceration? So what do you consider to be the most important priority at this moment?
To me, it's mass supervision. Working my organization, we focus on helping individuals navigate the probation and parole process, educating them on the fact that they can file early termination petitions and walking them through that process. Mass supervision is the driving factor of mass incarceration. And I think that if we educate our community on understanding the perils of, not going to trial and understanding the collateral consequences and the web and the tripwires of what probation offers, I think we, should change the culture in probation, and I think we should bring community in to hold accountability amongst each other, but also community-based and non-punitive solutions. I see individuals, I know that $100 million in Pennsylvania is used to incarcerate people for technical violations. This is not new crimes that's being committed. These are, moral wrongs, things that some people just doesn't have any other choice out of survival, and now they're back incarcerated because they can't meet with their PO, because they can't get a job fast enough, because they can't afford to pay court fines and fees or restitution, but they're not even given livable wages. So I think mass incarceration and mass supervision also should be studied on, looked at, and definitely reformed.
We need to prioritize abolition and stop talking about reform. Can we say that? Can we just say abolition? 1, 2, 3, abolition. Yeah. We need to prioritize abolition and stop joking ourselves and acting like we're going to reform these systems and that they're going to be better serving our communities. We need to destroy it entirely and create systems that are for us and ran by us. We need to allow resources to be funneled to the communities that need them and give them the agency to deal with, their different unique challenges as different unique communities and subsects of people. So we definitely need to prioritize abolition. And again, it was said earlier, I would also like to repeat this. This movement needs to be led by people who were impacted, people closest to the issues. We need to be working, together, and we need to stop doing this work in silos. We need to all be sitting down at the table and figuring this out together. So, yeah.
I've talked a lot. I'm probably one thing I'm gonna say is for juvenile justice, I think we need to really look to see whether community-based programs, like what does that actually mean? Where are the resources going? There has been this big reduction in youth incarceration in some places. Where is that money gone? Following the money, seeing what the programs look like, and are they actually serving as an alternative? Are they dealing with youth who committed serious offenses, or are they only dealing with youth who committed minor offenses? And I think that's something we need to follow up on. And also, to the extent that they are dealing with youth who have committed serious offenses or who are at risk of violence, of being the victim of violence, which is sometimes the case in these programs, how do those programs adapt to that situation? they're in the community, but the community isn't necessarily safe. So, how do we solve that issue? If we're moving in this community-based direction, how do we address those issues?
So there are so many priorities, and I want people to think about the language, so it's not just how we talk about people that are incarcerated and those that are adjacent to the incarceration, but think about narratives becoming policies. Super predators was brought up. Super predators bred a whole set of policies, that one little phrase. Outside of the criminal justice system, there's welfare queen, whole set of policies. Anchor babies, whole set of immigration policies. So language becomes really, really important so that they don't become policies. I'm, in addition to my work at Howard, I'm also a fellow at the Brookings Institution. So I am taking research and translating it to policymakers at the local, state, and national level. And that research is really important because it translates into how they rethink things. They got to rethink things before we can actually get them to address legislation. But part of that, doing research, is recruiting diverse graduate students. It is not continually replicating yourselves. You've heard this probably before, but this whole idea of bringing in lived experiences, but bringing those students into your classroom as students, not as guest speakers. It is diversifying your perspective of what you're teaching. There are now so many great scholars, Black scholars, queer scholars, critical or convict criminologists that are doing great and work that is published, award-winning, and they're interdisciplinary and they're multi-methods. And so I'm not asking you to redo your whole syllabi for those faculty members here, but you can change a section. You can change out 1 or 2 or 3 articles just to interject a different perspective, a different method, because again, research finds its ways to policymakers. And if we're doing research that is critical, that is inclusive, that is about equity, then we can actually start moving the needle. Yes, abolition is the goal. In the meantime, I just want better lived experiences for those that are inside and those that are returning. Thank you.
This question, and if this question goes away from ever being asked again, I will be so happy. And here's why I hate this question. I hate the word most. And I get asked this question, this is like the 3rd panel I've been asked this question. What is the most important reform? What is the most thing? It's so bad. So much is wrong with our criminal legal system. There are so many places for things to get better. Everything everybody has said here is really important. And I don't think one of this is the most, right? So I work on things that happen inside prison walls. And before I worked on helping to protect the health, safety, and dignity of people behind bars, I worked on improving the pretrial process. And when I worked on improving the pretrial process, that was the most important thing, right? To have people not come to jail. Now I'm working on protecting the health, safety, and dignity of people in custody who are at risk of all sorts of horrible things. That's the most important thing. It's all the most important thing. And until we hold each other up and acknowledge that what every single person is working on is important, and we should try and coordinate and hold each other up. And I think part of why you hear me getting angry at this question is because often I find myself having to go after foundation money, and it's set up, the pie is small, and so we are all set up in this line to get this little pie of money, trying to argue to the person with the pie that we should get further up in line and they should give the pie to our issue. What I'd really like us to do is work together and make the pie bigger because the problems are so vast.
I am always a fan of bigger pie. What can those in the room today do to begin to reduce the footprint of the system of the harms of mass incarceration? I feel like there's too many ofs in there. What can those in the room today do to begin reducing the footprint of the system and end the harms of mass incarceration? That's our last question.
Well, one thing that there are lots of, this is also the not the most, and there's lots of things, and so I'm going to say the thing that I don't think my other panelists are going to say, because that will be a value add. So, at the Prison Society, we, for 236 years, not all of which have I been alive or at the Prison Society, we have been the citizens that go behind the walls in Pennsylvania's prisons and jails. We're one of only 3 organizations in the country that can deputize regular people to go behind the walls and see what's happening and work to protect the health, safety, and dignity of our incarcerated neighbors. If you have not spent time in a prison and jail, see what we're spending our taxpayer money on, face to face. Have that experience. It will deepen your understanding of the harm that mass incarceration causes, and it will lend urgency to your drive to end it. If you're in Pennsylvania, you're welcome to come in with us. I invite you to explore other opportunities in your state to go on the inside.
I would say, coming from echoing on what she was saying, we're currently fighting. The conditions in Philadelphia's county jails are horrific. So bad that they were sanctioned a number of times so that our bail fund, the Philadelphia Community Bail Fund, can then post a bail for individuals that's living in condemned prisons. Even the commissioner admitted that they doesn't have the size nor the capacity to hold these individuals. If you've seen, there have been a number of escapes. 46 individuals died pre-trial. These are people that haven't been convicted. These are people that hasn't had their day in court yet, but they are dying in jails and prisons. So I think what we can do is work alongside community, those that's impacted, listen to stories, advocate for better conditions, but also continue to educate the community on how to hold our elected officials accountable. Learning that we elect our judges, we elect our district attorneys, has been a driving force for those that's impacted, understanding like, I can hold them accountable the same way that they hold me accountable. Oh, my judge is up for re-election. We still got the right to vote in Pennsylvania, then we got to utilize our vote to make sure that those people that's in power are not perpetuating harms in our community. So I guess my theme is always to educate one another, work alongside one another, open the door for those that's currently formerly incarcerated so that we can share the knowledge that we have so that we can make better informed and smart decisions and reverse the racist and broken laws that the system had created. And I think that, and I just want to also say that a number of women that's being overlooked because of what's going on in our nation. It's heartbreaking to see elderly people being pushed by younger people to the maternity ward upstate. We're being forgotten about. I love my juvenile life of brothers, and I stand in solidarity with them. But I say now it's time for us to focus on going back and bringing our grandmothers and our mothers home, because they are the structure and a cornerstone of our family. And without them, our children are being wiped up in this juvenile system. So we have to bring this together and focus on bringing our women home as well, with the same support that we have advocated to get a number of men home.
Other comments?
Keisha? Ready?
I would say that, say this again, abolition is not just, ending the practice of locking people up. It is a mindset, lifestyle. We need to decolonize our minds. You can't be an abolitionist, in the day, but then the prosecutor in your classroom or in your household. So we have to make sure that we're embodying, restorative principles, and, we're actually being the change that we want to see. That's where it starts. We have to be the change that we want to see.
So I'm going to say something that's kind of related to what Claire pointed out. Juvenile justice reform in Pennsylvania really was, in the 70s, was started by just the act of visiting an institution, visiting a detention center. That's how Barbara Fruchter from Montgomery County began. She went to the Montgomery County Juvenile Detention Center on a site visit with other women, volunteer women, who, after touring that, basically decided they saw abysmal conditions, and they basically decided, we're going to change this system, and we're going to start touring facilities all throughout the state and find out what's going on, because that's the problem, a lack of accountability. And so they created a group called the Juvenile Justice Center of Pennsylvania, no longer exists, but one of their main activities, and they even became official state inspectors for a few years in the 70s, was to basically just go around and make sure and kind of check on what's going on in facilities. And I think she was prisons. I'm sorry. And I think that she realized that this was the best form of education. That you had to see it to believe. You actually had to go there to understand what it's like to be in a prison, and that would lead to more empathy, more engagement with those issues, which would eventually lead to more accountability. And I just want to say one more thing, is that we as criminologists today have maybe the best ability to get into systems, get involved with systems, because there's so much interest in integrating criminological evidence into programming, especially in the juvenile justice system, and that we should find ways to establish partnerships and then make sure that we go out and find out what's happening in those systems, observe, talk to people who are the victims of mass incarceration, those behind bars, talk to people who are working in the system, but try to instill some system accountability through our own research.
So what can you do as individuals, as part of institutions? And I'm going to just uplift some of the other comments, and then I have to-do action list for you. So yes, include community-based solutions, participatory research, include people in the community. Do not parachute in and tell other people how to re-enter, how to live. You got to embed yourself and use an equity lens and think about the lived experience. For your additional action items, include an intersectional analysis. Gender and race, we know that Black women are, percentage-wise, are the largest people going inside, and they're now, percentage-wise, one of the largest groups coming home. I know that they're dwarfed by the number of men, but when you think about Black women and their role in the Black family and the Black community, when they fail at reentry, the ripple effect is multiplied. So their children, they lose and severed their parental rights, and their children are now in the foster care system. They are not allowed treatment because now a public health is really just for white middle class women to get public health or drug treatment, but not for Black women, because remember, Black women are the welfare queens in quotation marks. So use an intersectional analysis that highlights the gendered experiences and then the racial component. Lastly, on holding elected officials accountable, go to meetings, go to town hall meetings, figure out who has the power to make these decisions, who, when they're elected to office, what is their power to do, what is their portfolio. Go ask questions. My favorite question now is when I meet with elected officials, generally in private, but I think this should be in public too, is, so how are you keeping me safe by not investing in reentry? You just want to lock up people, but 97% of those individuals are coming home. So how are you keeping the larger community safe by only investing in the front end, but not in the back end? What are you doing to invest in community practices? What are you doing to invest in actual drug treatment? What are you doing to invest in mental health treatment? Ask those questions of elected officials, and before you go to those open meetings, look at the budget. A budget of a jurisdiction is their political statement of where their priorities are. Why are we investing so many billions of dollars into policing when police show up after the crime? They're not preventing anything. They just show up to take their reports. They are not actually closing a lot of major cases, let alone the minor property cases. And so we're investing more and more and more in surveillance to lock people up, but we're not investing in actually helping people. Those are your action items. Good luck.
Thank you so much. We do have about 15 minutes for comments and questions. So just line up or, no, oh, yeah, go ahead.
Here we go. Here. I am Jennifer Ortiz. I'm the chair of the Division of Convict Criminology, American Society of Criminology. I want to thank you all for doing this panel, LaTanya and Andre especially for being here. I want to take the programming committee and the sentencing project to task at the moment. I think it's very telling that there's not a convict criminologist on this panel. I think it's very telling that there was no attempt to include us while actively talking about including us. I think that's very telling. American Society of Criminology, we have been here since 1997. Convict criminology is not new. We exist in 9 different countries. We have a pretty strong network. We have initiatives to help the formerly incarcerated be in this space. We have scholarships that we self-fund to help our people. And I think it's very telling that you have a panel about 50 years of mass incarceration without any of us on this panel. And I met LaTanya yesterday, and I'm glad that you're here to speak for us. I really am. But I think that the American Society of Criminology has been actively complicit in the oppression of the incarcerated population and the formerly incarcerated population. The fact that you don't cite us. We have 35 years of research on a table right outside, written by currently and formerly incarcerated scholars. None of your work cites any of our work. So I take issue with you sitting here and telling us that we need to create programs that incorporate the formerly incarcerated while actively erasing us from your research. We're here. I represent hundreds of individuals who have served time. Our members have served over 500 years in prison. We know how to fix things. We are writing about it. And it's very clear that the people who are doing the work are not including us, right? Dr. Middlemass is probably one of my favorite scholars, and I respect her work, and we've been on panels together. And I'm glad that her voice is here. But we're here. We're here. We are outside. We're in this space. And the fact that you exclude us, and the fact that ASC has rendered our research to the margins of this conference for over 2 decades is very telling. And some of the comments on this panel is a clear indication of never having ever read any of our research. We just published an article on language. I am a convict. We are convict criminology. And while other words may make you feel better about yourself, they do nothing to help us. You can call me formerly incarcerated, you can call me system impacted, you can call me whatever you want, but your academic institutions will not give me a job. They will not admit our students with records. Do you know that 70% of colleges use the common application that asks about criminal records? Our members are forced to relive their worst days every single time they try to step foot inside of your academic institutions. And yet, you just ignore us. You ignore our existence. You want to know how to fix the system? I wrote a chapter on prison abolition, right? An exact vision on how to achieve prison abolition. Not a theory, a step-by-step. I wrote an article on mass supervision. We write these pieces, we are here, and yet you actively ignore us. And then you have a panel about what affects us without us. We live by this model, nothing for us without us. And so I want to take ASC to task. Shad knows we had a conversation about this. Shad's like an honorary homie to us for like 30 years at this point. He knows us, he knows who we are, right? We should be up here. I give credit to everybody doing phenomenal work. I think you all are doing great work. But the fact that this exists when our table's right outside and we're not here says everything you need to know about the complicity of criminology and academia in our oppression. Don't talk about us, talk to us.
I would like to immediately respond. So my colleague, my friend, my co-author, Calvin John Smiley, is over here. We co-edited a book called Prisoner Reentry in the 21st Century, Critical Perspectives of Returning Home, and we purposely included lived experiences of those. But I'm not considered a critical criminologist because I'm not in your field, and this is the problem with silos. Dr. Ortiz has a chapter in our book. So it's not as if I'm not speaking from experience of lived experiences, and I appreciate being on this panel, but I don't consider myself a critical criminologist, but I've done the work, but I don't fit into sort of the criminology silo. But doing the work is just as important, and including those persons that are harmed by the system in our work. Calvin John Smiley, who's at Hunter, I was gonna say the Graduate Center, but sorry. I know we're doing the work and there's others out there that are doing the work. I agree that there was not a critical criminologist as the framing on this, but I know I'm doing the work.
Thing that I wanted to ask about is that there's a population that really wasn't talked about today, and that's the elders, and it's about 40% of our prison population right now, and so I just want to know, what are your thoughts as far as ways that we could reduce this population? I know currently here in PA, we're working on geriatric medical parole and lifer parole, but are there other ways that you think that we could help reduce this population? Because this is a population that's going to continue to grow because of the lengthy sentences that are given out.
I think personally, instead of building hospice care centers for individuals that die in prison, that we need to get them into retirement homes, places where they can be amongst community in their last days of living. The geriatric bill is something that we've been advocating for in Pennsylvania to get our elderly loved ones home. Like you said, mass incarceration started in the 1970s, and here we are in 2023, and the number of the people who has been in jail for over 30, 50, 60 years. If it wasn't for the Miller decision for juveniles, a number of our juvenile lifers that's out here making change would have died in prison. So I think we need to focus on, is it worth our money to have a person on dialysis and being locked in the state penitentiaries? Or is it humane enough to allow them to come home and become, mentors or see their family for the last time? Is it worth, like I said, taking people to dialysis back and forth? Those infirmaries are horrible. People are having liver and kidney transplants and being put back into prisons that's been built in off of medieval times and like basically dungeons. So I think that's one of the ways that we need to address is by getting behind the geriatric bill and calling for the release of our elderly individuals so that they may come home and get treated with compassion and care.
We also can help these elderly individuals with the commutation process, especially here in Pennsylvania. I have a mentor of mine, his name is Paul Perry. He's been down for 40 plus years, and he needs help, but there's so many Paul Perrys. Well, I don't know Paul Perry, he's a great guy, but there's so many elderly people incarcerated who, can't wait for these bills to pass. And so something that we all can do is we can help them put together those commutation packets. We could help them through that process. Some of us, we're teachers, we have classes, send your interns to help, put that together. And so, we need to organize around that And that's something that can be, right now effective, because there's definitely the time is ticking on that commutation process. Who knows with, these elections that are coming, what it's going to look like. We have an opportunity right now in Pennsylvania, and we need to jump on it. So the commutation process is also something we could push for.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for being here and for sharing your expertise with us to help us grow as individuals and be able to benefit communities that we don't always see, but are the most vulnerable in a lot of ways. I really appreciate it. I wanted to ask 2 questions. The first is I recently read an article on Yale's Law and Political Economy Project, where they spoke about racial capitalism with respect to the situation in Israel-Palestine. And it's very much changed my perspective of how race operates in the United States. I was wondering if you could maybe lend some of your expertise and experience to shed light on how the criminal justice system both operates as a mean of racialization, both within itself and then as a product of people that go through the system. And then my second question relates in terms of abolition within the context of fiscal austerity, given that most individuals are already deprived of access to resources that they desperately need, regardless of criminal justice involvement. What are some steps that we could take in sequence, if there's a recommended sequence, for how to prepare the community to be able to handle the massive need that would result from a structural shift that significant? Thank you.
You got 4 minutes to do that.
I feel like I'm taking the SATs or something. I'm gonna take a crack at the first one. It's just completely evident that this system is working exactly as it's designed to. I think we just need to acknowledge that. The system is working exactly as designed to. Is to control specific populations and to keep that control. And so I honestly don't know how we address the racial disparities of the system without destroying it completely, because it's at every single phase. And so when we're talking about abolition and how do we prepare communities for abolition and for the release and the eventual destruction of these systems, that's a good question. I think we have to take every community by case basis. Something I always tell people, this is not going to be, whatever the solution is that we find is not going to be that one size fit all solution that the criminal legal system gives us. We have to work with communities and first give them the resources. When I talk about abolition, like I said, it's not just letting people out of jail. You can't talk about abolition without talking about addressing cultural trauma, addressing ancestral trauma. You can't talk about abolition without talking about reparations. So there's a wide range, a wide range of structural change that has to happen to support that. And taking funding from the police, taking funding from the savings. As part of the Care Not Control campaign, that's something that we're really pushing for with our demands, repurposing that funding so we can put it back into the communities and start preparing communities to develop those solutions.
There are a lot of nonprofit organizations that battle for the limited pie, and they compete and they write their grants and then they compete some more. But for those organizations that are currently in existence, find out what they're doing in your community, because I bet there are already people working towards helping people re-enter and helping people address their needs. That would be the first start. And the second one is set up a monthly donation to these nonprofit organizations. I'm not even talking about a lot of money, like $20 or $30 every month that you can send to an organization and then get your friends and say, hey, I don't need a Christmas gift or a birthday gift. Can you please just donate to so-and-so? And yes, I'm speaking from a very privileged position, but doing that allows a stream of money to come in that is not next to a grant. So the light bill can be paid for, the water bill, rent, because a lot of these grants are all for programming and not for infrastructure. But we know we got to be able to pay rent for these nonprofit organizations. So So I encourage you, if you are in a privileged position to afford to do that, think about creating a monthly donation to a nonprofit organization that is already doing reentry, holistic work programming in your community.
Okay, so I'll make this really quick.
Yes.
So hi, I'm Alana Henry, doctoral student. So I just wanted to make a point and then ask a question. So abolition, which I'm full on abolition, to do that would really mean that America as a whole and most of the world would have to recognize that the carceral system is a dehumanizing system and they don't view people who are part of it as humans. So I think abolition is gonna always be difficult, right? But then my question is almost to the point that I think your name Keisha is? Keisha made regarding recidivism. So I wanted to know from each of you all in the 2 seconds we have left, how do you all think we should define recidivism, right? Because we have so many different definitions, and I think that's how we really get to this point of abolition, if we recognize that most people who enter the carceral system in any capacity usually do good after, right? Like most people don't want to return. Most people shouldn't be in prison anyway or in jails, but they don't go back because they don't want to go back because they've seen the harm. So how do you all suggest that we, as researchers, as scholars, regardless of the field, move forward in defining recidivism so that we can eliminate the system and the harms that it reproduces? Loaded question. Take a stab at it.
I'll just let Keisha answer that before we close.
Sounds good. Sounds good to me.
Because she brought it up.
So I think it should be new charges reincarcerated is my suggestion to define recidivism. But that is limiting because then it ignores the harm of parole violations that send people back to prison. And it ignores the harm of having a bad parole officer, and the rules for federal parole, for instance, is you gotta be employed. But no one thinks about the systems of employment and the background checks that prevent people from getting employment, but then they're back inside because they failed at employment. There is probably no good definition of recidivism, and I know I just gave you my preferred one, but if it's holistic, I think that would capture the actual recidivism rate versus suppressing the way we do things. So it's everybody that is rearrested forward. If you're detained by the police forward in the criminal legal system, I think the holistic definition would be best, even though I just said my preferred one is new charges reincarcerated.
All right, well, that's all we have. Thank you so much for coming, and enjoy the rest of the conference.